Okay, so Sharon, I I'm going to get the formal part of the whole episode out of the way, just to welcome you and say that there's nobody who I'd rather have this kind of episode with. I kind of reached out to you, as you know, and said, why don't we get together and have a whole episode where we just discuss the things that we learned from the year of 2020. And I think I was partly inspired by a quote that I heard from Jim Rohn. I don't know. Do you know Jim Rohn? Do you remember him?
I I certainly know who he is. I
Yeah.
but I haven't listened to him or read him.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of, he was a Tony Robbins mentor, right? And I'm not a huge Tony Robbins guy anymore. I definitely was at one stage. But one of the reasons why I love Jim Rohn was he was all just about practical wisdom. How do you live a good life? How do you develop a lifestyle that works for you and your family and your community? And he was just a very practical guy, and a lot of his ideas really line up with some of the ancient ideas from philosophy. But one thing that he said, don't get through the day, get from the day. Don't get through the year, get from
Oh,
the year. And that's always stuck with me. And I thought, damn, 2020 was a crap year for a lot of people. It was when it comes to years, you don't get much worse than 2020. Well, okay, I'm not going to say that because you can get a lot worse. But I thought, despite that, it would be a real shame if people didn't find a way to recollect their thoughts on the year and find out what did they actually learn, because you don't want to waste a crappy year like that by just letting it go by without learning anything. And I think the f- for me, being in a very lucky country like Australia, where we really didn't get hit as bad as we could have, it was easier to learn some lessons than a lot of people. But I thought, man, I took so much away from that year.
yes.
Partly because 2 weeks before the whole thing happened, I quit my job, and that was like, so I was forced into this place where I had to pay attention. But I thought, Sharon, you were, pretty much with me throughout the entire year. We were conversing a lot, and building our own friendship, and I was so grateful for that, because you taught me so much, and we've, really had a great thing going here. Having these conversations, and so I thought, let's get Sharon on. Let's discuss what we learned from 2020, what we took from the year as opposed to just getting through it, and maybe we can help a few other people to reignite within their own minds some of the lessons that they learned from what could have been a year that we just decided to throw away as terrible, as opposed to getting something from it. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Sharon, or Shazza, your Aussie name, and I guess I'll let you start. Let's go back and forth. What's something that you took away from the year?
Well, I am happy to tell you a number of things I learned reflecting on 2020. But before I even get specific, one of the things I thought about is, when we talk about learning lessons, um, a lot of time learning is actually remembering something but you don't actively live. It's more of a thought on a page than something and live inside. And there's learning and then there's learning. There's a kind of learning where you can explain an idea eloquently or forcefully. And then there's the learning or knowing that actually changes how you feel inside, react to circumstance, and what you do or refrain from doing. So with all that in mind, the kinds of things I will say I really learned this year will not sound like burning bush moments, big epiphanies. It's more like returning to what I knew, what all of us know, but the beauty of huge calamity, which was 2020, is that it wakes you up. And so I was woken up to some simple but profound truths. And so, in no particular order, and I'm really winging it here, I would say, and I really hope that you, Simon, and our listeners don't think that I'm the mad woman in the attic or something, because I'm going to say something that could be misconstrued as, I don't know, a cult or something. But I'm just going to say it.
Just let me say that there's nothing wrong with being the mad woman in the attic, and that's already what I thought of you, Sharon. So,
okay, phew. All right. Well, then I don't have to manage my public presentation of self anymore, because I'm not doing too well at it. Okay. Anyway, what I learned is to listen to what I call the messages more. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about, little spirits or sprites or talking to me, but there are these moments as we go about the business of living where we have these kind of tangential thoughts or insights or kind of injunctions to ourselves. Hey, you might want to do this, or call Bob, and these ideas are not pertinent to what you're currently doing. They just kind of show up, little flashes. And I find that the more I do what those flashes say, the more, to put it in Stoic language, my life conforms to the will of nature, if I dare say that. Do you understand what I'm saying, Simon? I mean, I hope I don't sound really nuts. It's just ideas occur to us. I mean, it's the proverbial in the shower idea, right? So suddenly you get this flash of either insight, a problem that has been on the back burner, suddenly a solution appears, or just sometimes, it's that thing where you think of someone you haven't thought of in a long time. And I'm trying to, the wonderful creativity specialist, Julie Cameron, talked about, she called these what I call messages, she calls marching orders, that we get these marching orders. And most of the time we're inclined to disregard these things because they don't cohere with or further the interests of what is currently happening. And yet they're very, very important, I think. But if you don't act on them, then poof, they're gone. And that's that. So you following that?
No, I follow. Okay. I follow it way more than you might realize, right? And I'm gonna, okay, just in case anybody's watching this on YouTube, note that I have notes here, right? I have notes written down. This is proof of what I'm about to say, because it sounds like what you're saying is exactly the same thing as uh, as the first point that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about in terms of something that I learned, which is that I felt as though um, last year I was kind of, I threw myself into this challenge. It was like, okay, cool, quit your job, move in a direction of meaning of where you're being called to, whatever
Yes,
calling to means, doesn't really matter. Just the fact that that something is, there's something about you that is suggesting to you that this would be a better direction. And one of the things that I wrote was, I felt like I was uh, becoming more and more aware of what you might call my real self, right? The self that sits
yes,
below
yes,
the part of me that is constantly enforcing ideas or enforcing directions. It's the part that sits below and says, hey, hey, maybe this,
exactly. Yes,
and
maybe this.
exactly. And I think that there's a few tangible ideas that I can throw out there of moments in my life last year that this happened. One of them was, and you know about this very much because I've, like, how many times last year did I tell you, Sharon, I feel really like I should just get off social media. Like, so many times I told you that. And that was strange for me because I came out of this job where I was working in a gym and I was the king of social media. Like, everybody in this company, knew that I was really good at social media. It was my specialty. Every day I was on there doing videos, doing stupid things. And it's the reason we were able to build the business in the way that we did. And then when I came out and I was like, cool, I'm gonna be doing the podcast and I'm gonna be on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm gonna be everywhere. And I had all these accounts, but something in me was just like, this is just wrong. It was just like popping its head up every so often and saying, hang on, you're doing philosophy, right? This isn't about, don't spend your time where it's not necessary. Don't spend your time where you're really not getting any tangible meaning from it. And in the end, philosophy won, because I just had to get to a point where I said, you know what? I really don't want to be on social media. And whether it would be beneficial for me or not in terms of the business side of things doesn't matter as much as the fact that there's a real deep part of me that is just really yearning to get off, and move away from that. Um, and and that sort of stuff kept on happening. I'll give you a really funny example, Sharon. One thing that I kept on thinking throughout the entire year, because I I obviously had not finished my musical degree yet. And I felt like one of the reasons why I quit my job and came back to the podcast was because I really wanted to figure something out. I wanted to figure out something for sure. Like, I wanted to know something about myself that was true. And all throughout the year, at least the first half until I started practicing piano a bit, there was this thought that kept on coming up in my mind. And it was kind of like, man, I really hope that what I learned this year isn't that I need to get back into the music industry, because that'd be really uncomfortable. Like, it just kept on coming up. It'd be really annoying if what I learned from getting back into philosophy was that I need to focus on my music more, because that's a really uncomfortable thing and I don't want to do that. Isn't that the stupidest
Oh,
thing
that's
you've ever
so,
heard, Sharon? That
it's
that's
funny.
it's
Yeah,
the voice, right? It's the voice that's within
it's
you
the
saying,
voice.
I really hope you don't have to do this, because that'd be really good for you, even though it would be really annoying. And now I'm weeks away from finishing putting together this album that is just everything that I would want from something to come out of last year in terms of representing the direction that I went. And I agree with you. This whatever it is, the messages, the marching orders, the voice, consciousness, conscience, God, whatever it is,
Yes,
it's that thing that just gets up there and says, "Here's the truth," even though you're not willing to see it.
yes.
Um,
Because
and
it always puts
yeah,
a demand on you.
yeah,
Excuse me for excuse
yeah,
me for interrupting, but
no,
it always it's never saying go sit on the beach with a cocktail with an umbrella in it.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
never says
Yes.
that. It never says that.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, forgive me.
No,
Keep going.
no,
I'm sorry.
no. I guess I only had one more thing that I could add to it, which was that I think that it's important for me to mention the things that led me to actually paying attention to those voices, right? And I think that there was this idea that I learned that came from Carl Jung, and it was what you most need to find will be found where you least want to look, right? And I often
Yes.
find that those little things that pop up and say, this is what you need to do, are the exact opposite of what you would want to do, right? I often find that they're the things that, are you too busy, or you're too focused on this thing, or you're focused on that thing. It's just not in my purview of interest at the moment. But man, if you start to listen to that, what you wake up to is that, like the psychoanalysts figured out, right? There's a part of you that does kind of the speaking, right? Or it's almost like the persona. It's the you that is still trapped in everything that you think you are. But then there's
Yes.
the part of you below that that is kind of just desperate for you to listen to it and go where it's almost like fate. Um, and so I feel like these ideas all coincide. It's like, listen to the voice that is telling you the thing that is uncomfortable, and go where it is uncomfortable, because that's exactly where you need to go to find what you need to find. And on top of that, it's almost like the Epictetus. I think I just made up a new word. No, the Epictetus advice of, don't just be dragged along by the cart of fate. Go with it. Like, if fate is
Yes.
calling you, then listen to that, pay attention, and just try it for a month. Try it for a week. Just see what happens.
See what happens.
Yeah. So that's my first one anyway, and I think that, yeah, that's probably the most important, because it's becoming aware of a part of yourself that you don't pay attention to often enough. But yeah, I don't know, Sharon. Like, what was it? Do you think that, like, what do you reckon it was that got you starting to hear that? Do you think it was like a heightened sense of awareness because of all the chaos that was happening? Did you feel that at all?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I mean, well, this is over a bit of an exaggeration, but before the cascade of um, events that we all shared happened, I I think I was kind of a sleepwalking version of myself,
Mm.
and and that was a terrific, despite all the pain, despite all the loss. I mean, have heaven knows we have lost so much, and so many people have suffered, but we're starting to wake up a bit. And related to that, Simon, is you were talking about listening to that voice. uh, I In 2020, I learned more than ever the importance um, of having some kind of daily ritual of meditation, yoga, contemplation. For some people, it's swimming or running, doing some kind of physical activity. But whatever it is that pulls us back from what we think our lives are about,
Mm.
and helps us get under our busy minds. And I just think that, I mean, I don't believe that people should meditate in order to, get more messages, but because the whole point of having this kind of daily visit with, or no, wait, it's more like just a letting go, and just taking some time every day to stop clutching onto our cherished opinions, what we think is so important, what we, to just take a brief break from that helps us disrupt certain thinking patterns that blind us to what we need to know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And I'm gonna throw one of your lessons that you taught me back at you, right? Because you're right. This idea that we need to kind of pause, and we need to sit with ourselves and allow the clutter of life to drift away, as much as it can, so that we can see a little bit clearly. I think that what you said about almost being a sleepwalker is exactly right. I think that many people were sleeping before 2020. I think many people are awake right now. I think um,
Mhm.
I'll tell you a funny story after this, but um, uh, one thing that you taught me, which is one of those lessons that you can look back on your life and say that changed everything for me, was the idea of Poe. To sit with an
Yes,
idea.
yes,
That was transformational. I think I can genuinely say that many of the lessons that I learned in 2020 were at least enhanced, or would not have happened for me if I hadn't have had you telling me at the very start of the year, Poe, sit with an idea, sit with a thought, sit with, a potential pathway. Don't say yes, don't say no, just allow it to
right.
seep in and see what happens. And that was transformational. I think that we do live very clearly in a yes or no culture at the moment. We live in a
Oh,
yes or
yes,
no, good or bad. We live in, right or wrong. Um, I think we could all use a little bit of Poe, just a little bit of just sit back for a second and what's really important. And I have
yes.
to I have to tell you this because it was hilarious. Um, I think I found out why people are so prone to conspiracy theories when catastrophe strikes, because I felt like at the start of the year, when all of it was coming out and all the the COVID news was starting to happen and everywhere was locking down and we'd just gone into lockdown, I really did feel as though a part of myself woke up. It was like the classic story of the mythological, encounter with a dragon or encounter with chaos, and all of a sudden you're thrown back a bit and you become hyper aware. I felt this hyper sense of awareness about everything, and I think it was really good for me because one of the things that I took away from last year was I started to develop a far more sophisticated approach to beauty and art, and seeing delicate beauty in nature and just around me, just paying attention to what's around me, and
Yes.
recognizing that there's so much more to see than what we actually see. Um, but one of the things that started happening was I said to my wife one day, I was like, I'm hearing ambulances outside pretty much every half hour to hour now. What if the government is sending ambulances around to scare people? and and I just felt this hyper sense of awareness. I was like, what's happening with all these ambulances? And it was
Yes.
probably nothing because we didn't have a huge outbreak here on the Sunshine Coast. But what it taught me, and I didn't actually really think that that was going on, but I was leaning into this hyper sense of awareness that was coming about as a result of everything in the world changing. And 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 I thought that was just interesting to learn that about yourself, that we don't get that enough in Western culture, because for so many of us life is so much easier than it has been ever for humans, right? And so there's a lot that we
Yes.
don't see because we don't need to see it. But when something like this happens, it almost takes us back, in my opinion, to almost like that primal awareness of, hang on, something's
Yeah.
happening. I need to pay attention. What's going on? I don't know. Like, and so when you say sleepwalking, it just made a lot of sense to me, because it's exactly what I experienced as well.
And we so incline, or we so reflexively want to tell ourselves a story
Yeah.
to make sense of the things of which we're aware, rather than letting them sit in that space of suppose, or perhaps, perhaps. Again, hearkening back
Mm,
to the idea of Poe, that we don't have to immediately snap to a conclusive, comprehensive explanation for every cluster of
mm,
inputs that come to us, that we can dwell in the ambiguity, the beautiful ambiguity of life, rather than just being these kind of vicious disambiguators. You
mm.
know, I
Yeah, yeah. Because things are so
yeah.
complex, right? And
Oh
obviously
yeah.
our brain has become so good at turning complexity into something resembling order, and I think that
Yes.
I have to say, I think that that was important for me to recognize as well, in terms of my path to recognizing how beautiful things can be if you pay attention, was that lean into the complexity. And what you'll see is that
Yes.
within the complexity is horror and terrifying things that will you know kill you. But there's also just extravagant beauty, and if you look at it,
Yes.
you'll see
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is exactly why I now have on my desk this beautiful little vase with tiny little flowers in it.
So what is the story of that?
Oh, I think I
Is
think
it
I
a reminder, a kind of talisman to remind you to hew
well,
to the beauty? I'll here. You
yeah,
talk.
no, I don't quite know. I started realizing that, why don't I have beautiful things on my desk that while I'm working and being creative, I can look at them and think,
Yes.
excellent, there's beauty in that. And I think that was just a little vase that I found in an antique store when my wife and I were traveling around Queensland doing some work for my parents' company, and I found this little vase and I thought, that's beautiful. And then I thought, ooh, what can I put in it? That will just make it a beautiful little work of art that you can just sit there. But um, you obviously have been somebody who have taught me this as well, Sharon. I mean, you probably more than anybody who I've spoken to seem to have a really natural sense of being able to pay attention to the beautiful parts of life and to pay attention to the close details and the intricacy. And I don't know, how did you develop that?
I would have to give a lot of credit to my mother, who she's still alive, but you not kind of 100% with us anymore. But she was an abstract painter, um, of some renown, and she 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 made really huge, uh, bold, um, oil paintings. But I would watch her. I have I had no artistic calling as a child. I
Mm,
mean, my mother the tools she used, the language of art were completely foreign to me. But I would watch her working on some ginormous canvas, and she would have a little brush and just spend a whole day, working on something the size of a postage stamp and just
Mm.
getting it right. And she just had that eye for detail. And we're really, really different kinds of people. But one of the things about her is she seldom wants to go anywhere. I was always much more expansive and wanted to travel and learn things. And it's not that she's agoraphobic, but I remember just saying, well, what do you want to stay at home all the time and just paint for? And I remember one time she just pointed to her head and she said, "Gardens of the mind, Sharon, gardens of the mind. What I have inside of me is so vast and so precious, and what I have immediately around me is so vast and so precious. I don't need to go other places." And like I say, it wasn't like she was some kind of willful shut-in, but she could find so much going on in any given moment, mostly visually, but in every other sense. And she was delicate because of that, because, uh, sounds, everything, words made such an impression on her. So I got kind of lost there, but she just embodied that idea of really seeing and appreciating the significance of what is happening right now within
Yeah.
our sensory field. And I was reminded of her, Simon, when you first started showing me some of your exquisite nature photos, close-ups of,
Mm.
this filigreed spider web or something, with little dewdrops on it.
Mm.
And I just thought, yeah, that's how Lila saw the world. That's how my
Mm.
mom saw the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Sharon. I got goosebumps when you said, gardens of the mind. I think that's an exquisite metaphor for, thinking about this. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think kind of relates to something that I realized this year was the infinite nature of consciousness is something that we really need to recognize, because once you realize that as soon as you go into your head there's no end, you can, as you say, build gardens in the mind. You can
Yeah.
literally sit there all day and think about whatever you want to think about, and you can explore whatever ideas you want to explore. There's no end. And it almost creates this kind of, you almost start to understand that idea that comes from, say, Christianity, that the individual is the center of the cosmos, center of the universe. Because it's like you've got you here and you look out and it's infinitely complex and
Yes.
infinitely strange and fascinating, and there's so much to see. But the exact same thing happens when you look within. It's infinitely complex. You have no idea what consciousness is, and I still don't think we have any idea what it is. You have no idea how far your thought can go or how deep it can go. And that means that you're kind of just this body navigating between the complexity of the outer world and the complexity of the inner world, trying to figure it out. And it's a strange trip once you realize that. Hey, and I think that just that gardens of the mind, I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. So Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm grateful to you for asking the question because she probably said that to me 25 years ago, and I haven't thought of it
Hmm.
all that time. She
Yeah.
taught me an important lesson there. Yeah.
She sounds like she definitely had what you might call wisdom, because that idea floats through so many philosophies. It's in Taoism, it's definitely in Stoicism. This idea that once you know, you don't actually really have to go anywhere. Like once you have that knowledge of uh, whatever the wisdom, whatever it is that they were talking about, knowledge of something eternal. You don't need to travel to a faraway land, in order to experience what it is that your mind is seeking to experience. And I always wondered about that. I was like, oh, that's a stupid idea. I want to travel. I was like, and I still do. A part of me still wants
Yeah.
to explore the world, but another part of me recognizes the truth in that idea, which is that, I mean, if I don't get a chance to explore the world, then there's enough right here that can keep me busy for at least 17 lifetimes. Like there's enough right here that can keep me preoccupied.
Oh, yes. And it's really a failure of the imagination to think otherwise.
Mm, yeah. Well, I love it. I'm gonna throw it back at you, Sharon, and say, what's another thing that you took away from 2020? We'll get back on track.
Okay.
Not that I want to
Let
keep us
me
on a particular track, because I think that what's happening now is great, and we'll probably turn this into about 3 episodes because we won't have enough time to get through all of it.
Okay, let's see. Oh, I okay. Um, I relearned the importance of hanging hanging on to our aspirational self while um, accepting and appreciating and reveling in our currently imperfect self.
Mm,
In other words, I guess just that idea of we can always carry a kind of ideal that we want to embody or express, but to do that without disavowing just who we are, you know, our lumpy old selves.
mm.
Yeah, just that kind of balance, so that one isn't always feeling like you have to change, you've got to improve, you've got to, which can end up really being kind of self-hating, because then it's like,
Mm,
well, you're always this rat on a wheel, trying to be wiser, smarter, thinner, whatever. It's a kind of materialism in a way.
mm,
So yeah, something about that balance between
mm.
who we want to be, sort of the direction we're going in, while being perfectly pleased with where we are.
Yeah,
Does that make
yes.
sense to you?
It makes so much sense. Yeah, and I'm gonna here's what I'm gonna do right here, because I think this is necessary. Oh gosh, I can't even find it. How embarrassing, Sharon. I go to reach for your book and I can't even find it on my shelf because it's so messy. Okay, one thing that I learned from your interpretation of Epictetus's writings, and I now tell this to every single one of my clients who I coach, on our first session and then repeatedly throughout all the other sessions. Epictetus said that personal growth needs to be a mixture of self-scrutiny and self-kindness. And I
Yes.
couldn't agree with you
Yes.
more. I mean, it's got to be a balance. And I think that I also really tried to take that on this year, because one funny thing that I'll tell you is I came out of the fitness industry, and I can count on one hand the number of times that I went to the gym last year after quitting the fitness industry, right? I might have gone 3 times, maybe. Um, and I have gone kind of downhill in my health. But a part of me was saying, you know what? It's okay for now. It's okay, because the
Yeah.
other things that I was focusing on, like the writing, the music, the podcast, the coaching, all of that sort of stuff, they were so meaningful to me that I just decided, you know what? You're not unhealthy. You know, you're not getting to the point where, all your clothes are not fitting and the alarm bells aren't sounding at the moment. So just give it go for a walk every so often, go for a jog, do things that you love to do in nature, climb mountains.
Yes.
But apart from that, be kind to yourself, and don't constantly be that person who's just like, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. That kindness plus the scrutiny that says, okay, now you're going a little bit too far into the kindness, right? Now you need to actually pull yourself out, because you're turning into a lazy bastard. But
Yeah.
I really found that so yeah, the art of living, to be found in any good bookstore near you or Amazon. Go get it, because that's one of the best pieces of advice that I ever took away from Epictetus, and it was revivified through your interpretation. So, but yeah, I agree. And you say you relearned this. Do you feel like you kind of fell out of it for a while?
Oh yes. I mean, I think I think life is is a dialogue or a dance with everything and everybody. And what it is we drift and we return, and we drift and we return. Uh, that applies to me towards wisdom or a marriage. There's times in a marriage. It could be one day, it could be 1 hour, it could be 2 weeks, where things get a little chilly, between yourself and your spouse, or you're just going off in different directions or whatever.
Mm.
So you drift and then you return, and you drift and return, and we learn things, and we kind of leave them by the side of the road for a while we're paying attention to others. I mean, we can't do everything at once. We just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So we might as well, just can't do everything at once.
Yeah. A bit of
And
forgiveness,
that's
a bit of
fine.
self-forgiveness goes a long way.
Yes. And the point isn't to be to arrive at some kind of conclusive end of the road. Aha, I have finally achieved perfection along this dimension, and that's not the, I mean, that doesn't exist anyways. We know that.
Mm.
We know that.
Yeah.
And of course, then we always have our friend, memento mori, you
Mm.
know, uh, always having the awareness of our potential death. I mean, I think of you, Simon. If for some reason, God forbid, tomorrow you die, I don't think you're going to have any big regrets about having not gone to the gym in the last,
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
you know, who cares?
Yeah.
And going to the gym is valuable for, for certain reasons, but memento mori.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I have to say, Sharon, I mean, like, one of the things that happened to me last year was I started doing things that made me feel as though I could happily die and have no regrets. One of those
Yeah.
things was writing the book, which I keep on talking about. People, I promise it will be out sometime, sometime soon, hopefully. Um, uh, but that writing that was something where I said, what, damn, like, having done this, it's so meaningful. It's so
Yes.
deeply who I am, that I could happily die and feel as though I left something that was real and truthful from me. And it's the same with the album. And exactly what you said, there were moments where I kind of said, you know what, I'm not going to go to the gym today, but I am going to sit at the piano. Or I'm not going to go to the gym today, but I'm going to go climb a mountain and do some writing on the top, and I'm going to do those things that make me that I feel really justify the fact that I'm here. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to do a cheesy segue into maybe another lesson that I learned, because one of the things, we talk about kindness and scrutiny. I feel like what happened to me last year was that I had somebody who was bringing out the self kindness in me and the encouragement in me, and that was you. We had multiple conversations, off the podcast, and pretty much every one of those conversations I got off, and I just felt like, damn, Sharon has awoken a part of me that is willing to be kind to myself and to say, just go for it, just try something, just try, just whatever it is that you're being called to, just try it. And and don't imagine for a second like you're going to be perfect in doing it. That's one of the things you constantly told me, is just forget about perfection, just try it and see what happens. And that really worked for me, right? I had that kindness from you encouraging me and saying, just try something. And and then I also, on the other hand, I was listening to so much Jordan Peterson, and his thought was encouraging to me, because he was one of the first people who, I genuinely think that he's one of the first people who I've listened to who is engaging in something that really resembles what you might call philosophy, really trying to pull ideas apart and get to the bottom of things, and to and that's not to say that there aren't other people who are practicing philosophy. It's just I was drawn to something that he was saying, and he kind of set this ideal for me. It was like, man, if I could learn to think even 5% in the kind of way that he thinks about the world, it would be valuable for me. So I had that scrutiny, which was like, here's the ideal, let's try and hit that. And then I had the kindness, which was you saying, just go for it, just try something, just try, see what
Yeah.
happens, you've got it within you, and that really worked for me, like having, these two influences in my life. And um the segues, because one of the ideas that I learned from Jordan Peterson was, he was talking about Carl Jung. So much of the stuff comes from Carl Jung, because he reads he goes into a lot of the psychoanalyst work. And it's this idea that one thing that's supposed to happen when you get older is you're supposed to reconnect with the child that you left behind when you were being enculturated into your community, right? Because
Mhm.
obviously culture is going to take some parts of you and throw them away, right? And it's probably necessary that some parts of you burn off like the dead wood. And that doesn't mean that culture is bad. It just means that it's a thing that you have to kind of get used to, and it develops you. But this idea was that you're also going to leave some things behind as you develop into your culture, and you need to
Yeah.
go back and revisit those. And one of the really strange things that happened to me last year, Sharon, and you were kind of alongside me in all of this, was I realized, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. So when I was younger, I really loved playing the piano, and I would noodle around and I'd come up with all kinds of tunes, and I was learning to play by ear, and it was really working for me. And then my parents put me into some lessons with a piano teacher, and this piano teacher was like, okay, cool, you got to play these notes in this time, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. And I just shut off. I didn't want to play piano anymore, because
Yeah.
I wasn't being taught as an individual. I was being taught as a member of the culture who should do this and should do that. And that's just not how I learned. And so I started playing a little bit more piano in university, and I pretty much stayed the same for about 5 or 6 years, where I could play a few chords. I could basically accompany myself on some jazz ballads, but I wasn't progressing at all. And then one thing that I started to do last year was I said, okay, well, hang on. What if, what, I clearly don't like practicing trumpet. I clearly don't practice singing. But if I watch myself, this is another idea I learned from Jordan Peterson. If you watch yourself for a week, you'll notice that you do all kinds of things that you don't think you should do. And you'll also notice that you seem to find value in all kinds of things that you're not even paying attention to. Just watch yourself and see what you do as if you don't know who you are. And I found that, hang on, I can sit at the piano and practice for hours and still feel energized. So, what if I'm not a jazz trumpeter? What if I'm just a musician and I can transfer my skills onto any instrument that I'm interested in and develop that? And then I said, okay, cool. What if I'm not a musician? What if I'm a creative artist? That means that I can feel very confident in writing or playing piano or writing poetry. I've started drawing now. Breaking down the barriers that your culture necessarily gives you in order for you to grow into something, but breaking down those barriers so that you awaken the part of yourself that just goes where it wants to go. And when I did that, I found that I reconnected. It's so funny. Like you said before, sometimes you learn something that you can explain, but sometimes you really learn something and it becomes a part of you. And that really became a part of me because now I'm about to release an entire album of piano. And that's just because I decided that, hang on, I really love playing piano and I did when I was a kid. Let's reinvigorate that part of my childhood and bring out the inner child within me and just start playing piano. And the improvements that I've made, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but the improvements that I've made over a year on piano just by recognizing that it's where I want to be and just by
Yeah.
sitting down and uh, playing in the musical sense, but also playing in the child sense. It's man, the improvements I've made are amazing, and I'm starting to sound like something as opposed to nothing. And that idea, the truth of that idea, really just, as cheesy as this word is, manifest itself to me throughout the entire year of revisit the child within you. What was it that you really wanted when you were a kid that was beat out of you by your culture, partly necessarily and partly just arbitrarily? Find that again. And so that, I don't know, that's kind of one of the really big ones that I took away. And I think that part of your guidance was so helpful, which was like, just sit with yourself for a bit. Whatever it is that is calling you in that direction, just go after it. Just try it. Sit down and write for a day. See what happens. So thank you, Sharon, because you added to that.
That's great to hear. As you've been speaking, I I thought to myself, we could all really do ourselves a favor by letting go of trying to be intelligible to other people. In other words,
Mm.
so much of that conditioning is in service of helping other people put us into categories so that they they can form some understanding of who we are and
Mm.
also our own self understanding. But we're returning to that idea we were running around with earlier in this conversation, complexity and ambiguity. That's really where we live. People can say, you know, I play the I'm a trumpet player, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. And it's not that those things are untrue, but there's so much else going on
Yeah.
that doesn't fit into those little slots. This has
Yeah.
just been a lot of fun. You've given me so much food for thought, Simon. I'm
Mm.
going to have to ring off in a minute, but I'm so looking forward to our monthly conversations.
Yeah. And now might be a good time to actually mention that for everybody listening now, what Sharon and I are planning is to every month get together and have a conversation just like this. And I just can't wait, Sharon. I think it's going to be wonderful. And I think the fact that I've just gone to number 2 of the lessons that I learned out of like 15 means that we've got a lot of stuff to cover in the coming months, and I just can't wait. And there's other projects that we're kind of strangely collaborating on the side, things that we're doing together, and I'm excited to bring those to light in future episodes as well. But Sharon, it's been beautiful. Thank you so much for the spirit that you bring to these kinds of conversations, and it's always uplifting, and I can't wait to do this every month.
Amen. Thank you, Simon. Everything's better when I have a talk with Simon. Bye for now, but love always.
Hey there, YouTubers. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this episode and you'd like many more just like it, then you can head to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. There you'll get access to exclusive episodes that haven't been released yet, as well as many other benefits. Also, if you'd like to work one-on-one with me in my coaching practice, then you can head to simonjedrew.com/coaching. Talk to you soon.